Hi, it's Dr. Hood, medical doctor here to help busy people like you get lean and get fit while eating more and exercising smartly. Today we're going to talk about the difference between red and processed meat. So let's talk about red and processed meats. Now, often you'll find red and processed meats lazily put into the same group by articles, quite commonly on the BBC, but also many other websites, as foods that we need to cut down on. So we need to cut down on salt, apparently, saturated fat, and red and processed meat together. That's quite a lazy way to group them together, quite unscientific, to group red, fresh red unprocessed meat with processed meat. Let's define first of all what processed meat means. And it means a variety of things. So it can mean your cured or smoked meats or fish, which, often smoked is just a way of preserving the food, and it still maintains its nutrient density, still has it's rich in protein or healthy fats. And then you have the cheap burgers and sausages, which are 50% meat and high percentage of fillers, starches, and flour and sugar. These can't be considered the same because the cured foods, they're slightly modified by the smoking process or the curing process, and the cheap burgers and sausages are lower in lower in protein, lower in healthy fats, higher in sugars, starches, carbohydrates, and often the poorest cuts of meat just put into a cheap sausage or a cheap burger. So there's a spectrum of what's considered the best meats and potentially the worst meats. The best meats are your organic, grass-fed, fresh, unprocessed red meats, and even if they're not grass-fed, even if they're not organic, if they're not processed, they're still on the good end of the spectrum. And the worst end of the spectrum are these cheap burgers, cheap sausages, salamis, your cheap pastrami's that are filled with fillers. These are lower in good quality protein and fats, often lower in other micronutrients, and rich in sugar, potato starch, cornstarch, flour. So you can't consider these the same. In the middle, you have the cured and smoked meats, and I'll talk about these briefly. Now, the reason red and processed meats are considered together is this lazy idea that eating more of these is associated with an increased risk automatically of colorectal cancer. And if you read a lot of vegan literature, almost any cancer is has increased risk with eating meat, and also an increased risk of ischemic heart disease or heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. The fact is, there is no evidence linking, or there is no evidence that's shown a causative association between eating fresh unprocessed red meat and an increased risk of bowel cancer or heart disease. And there are isolated studies, but when you look at the evidence as a whole, and when you look at meta-analyses, which are study of studies, the correlation is quite weak. And even in studies where you find an association between processed meats and an increased risk of bowel cancer, for example, firstly, it's difficult to completely tease out the confounding factors. That is, people who eat more processed meats are more likely to also eat bread, more likely to eat ketchup, more likely to have fries, more likely to have sugary drinks, and also more likely to smoke more and exercise less. And even if you try, statistically to modify for this, you're still not going to be able to tease it out completely. And so these studies, make some claims about the increased risk of disease with consuming these foods, when really it's only a possible association. And there have been some studies that have looked at people who have healthier diets and have found that those who have healthy diets, who are vegetarian or eat meat, there's not much difference in their life expectancy or their increased risk of disease. So it's not clear cut. The other aspect is that even if you consider the processed meats and you look at the risk of you developing cancer by eating these meats, it's nowhere near the risk for smoking. So the World Health Organization has classified smoking, cigarettes or tobacco as a definite carcinogen, and lazily put red and processed meat as a possible carcinogen. But again, the risks are relatively low. So eating a strip of smoked salmon or smoked pastrami, it's not going to significantly increase your risk of colorectal cancer if you're also eating an otherwise nutrient-dense food, if you're exercising regularly, you're well hydrated, you don't smoke, you don't have the genetic risk factors, all these things. So it has to be balanced against that, and also against the nutrition that it provides you. Ideally, you want to be eating more unprocessed meat and less processed meat. But if most of what you're eating is unprocessed, a small amount of smoked and cured food, and a minimal amount of your filled, poor quality meat, and then you add to that non-starchy vegetables and some other healthy fats, and minimize carbohydrates, that's when you're going to maximize the nutrients, and you're not really going to significantly alter your risk of heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and cancer. So make sure to be aware of this fact that there is a difference between red and processed meat, and also be aware of the different types of processed meat and actually the real evidence linking these, or supposedly linking these, to your risk of disease, and balanced against the nutrition that these all provide. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please consider subscribing so you can be notified about videos which I'm going to post on a regular basis. If you have benefited from this video, then I've got a great resource for you. It's my 9 to 5 lean body blueprint. It's available in the description below. Take a look, grab your copy. It will give you some actionable tips on how you can take control of your health as a busy working person. I'll see you in the next video.